Beneath the sheets, the first light of dawn had just begun to paint the sky in soft hues of pink and gold as Lena Morales walked down the dimly lit corridor of the Starlight Motel. At 38, Lena had spent more mornings than she cared to count in this place. Her hands gripped the handle of her mop, her gaze drifting across the faded wallpaper and the familiar scuff marks on the floor, blemishes she knew as intimately as the lines on her own palms. The Starlight Motel stood like a weary sentinel on the outskirts of Orange Mound, Tennessee. Its L-shaped, two-story structure had once seen better days. Now, the flickering neon sign outside barely held onto its glow, struggling against the thick pre-dawn darkness. A small playground sat beyond the parking lot, a silent witness to happier times. But the rusted swings and abandoned slide were long past their days of laughter. Lena was about to start her morning routine when something caught her eye, something that made her pause. A woman and a small boy were leaving their room in a hurry. The child's clothes were disheveled, barely covering his tiny frame. The mother's movements were frantic, her eyes darting nervously down the hallway. Lena felt a chill creep up her spine. Something was wrong. Trusting her instincts, she waited until they disappeared out the front entrance before making her way to the door they had just abandoned. It was slightly ajar, a deep sense of unease coiled in her stomach as she stepped inside. The room smelled of stale air and something else, something metallic. Something wrong. Her pulse quickened. She pulled back the sheets. And then she saw it. The sight beneath the crumpled bedspread sent an icy shock through her veins. Her worst fears were confirmed. Lena staggered back, her breath caught in her throat. She had mere seconds to decide what to do before it was too late. She had to act fast. Lena had spent more mornings in this place than she cared to count. Her hands wrapped around the worn handle of her mop, guiding it in smooth, practiced strokes across the floor. The faded wallpaper and scuffed linoleum had become as familiar to her as the lines on her own palms. The Starlight Motel stood like a weary sentinel on the outskirts of Orange Mound, Tennessee. Its once vibrant L-shaped structure had long since surrendered to time. The neon sign outside now flickering weakly against the pre-dawn gloom. Beyond the cracked parking lot, a small playground sat in silent testimony to happier days, its rusted swings and forgotten slide untouched by children's laughter for years. The only sounds breaking the morning stillness were the rhythmic swish of Lena's mop and the occasional creak of the aging building settling into itself. It was a routine she knew well, almost meditative in its familiarity. But as she neared the end of the corridor, something made her pause. Through the smudged glass of a front window, a flicker of movement caught her eye. She set the mop aside and moved closer. Outside, an old sedan crept into the lot, its headlights slicing through the misty morning air before the engine cut off. Two figures emerged, a woman and a young boy. The woman looked exhausted, her movements jittery and unsure as she yanked a battered suitcase from the trunk. The boy, dressed in pajamas at least a size too small, clung to her hand, his head drooping with sleep. He let out a wide yawn, rubbing at his eyes with a small fist, a gesture so innocent, so heartbreakingly familiar, that it tugged at something deep in Lena's chest. Realizing they would need to check in, she abandoned her mop and made her way to the front desk. The ancient clock on the wall read 6:30 a.m., far too early for the regular receptionist to be on duty. But that was nothing new. Over the years, Lena had become accustomed to handling early morning check-ins. She was a jack of all trades in this run-down establishment. As the woman and child stepped into the dimly lit lobby, the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows beneath their eyes, exaggerating their exhaustion. Lena forced a polite smile, though it felt thin even to her. "Good morning," she greeted softly, mindful of the sleepy child. "How can I help you?" The woman hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the shabby lobby. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "We need a room, just for the night." Lena nodded, her fingers moving efficiently over the motel's ancient computer keyboard. "Of course, that'll be $30 for the night, with a $20 deposit." The woman fumbled in her purse, pulling out a crumpled handful of bills. Lena counted the money quickly, then reached for a key. As she did, she couldn't help but notice the boy's drooping eyelids, the way he swayed slightly on his feet. His mother, too, looked utterly drained, dark circles heavy beneath her eyes. "You'll be in room 12, Lena said, handing over the key. "If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your room." The trio walked down the dimly lit corridor in silence, their footsteps echoing faintly against the worn floor. Lena could feel the exhaustion radiating from both mother and child, so she kept her explanations brief as she ushered him inside. "The phone is here if you need to reach the front desk, just dial 0," she said, gesturing toward the ancient rotary phone on the nightstand. "Hot water is limited, so you might want to keep showers short. Checkout time is 11 a.m. tomorrow." The woman gave a distracted nod. already moving toward the bed to set down her suitcase. Lena winced internally as she saw the luggage wheels leave a dark streak across the worn bedspread. But she said nothing. The boy, too tired to care about formalities, climbed onto the bed with his shoes still on. His small head sank into the flattened pillow, his eyelids fluttering as sleep threatened to pull him under. "If you need anything else, don't hesitate to ask," Lena offered, but the woman barely seemed to register her words. Taking that as her cue to leave, Lena quietly stepped out, pulling the door shut behind her. As she made her way back to the reception area, her mind drifted. She couldn't help but wonder about them, the thin, exhausted mother, the boy clinging to her side. What had led them to the Starlight Motel at this hour? What were they running from? But speculation was a dangerous game in a place like this. Guests at the Starlight often carried secrets, and Lena had learned long ago that some questions were better left unasked. With a sigh, she reached for her mop, ready to pick up where she had left off when a sudden realization struck her. In the rush to settle them in, she had forgotten to provide the TV remote and the Wi-Fi information, both stored at the front desk. The remote kept there specifically to prevent theft. Muttering at her own forgetfulness, she retrieved the items from the locked cabinet and made her way back down the hall. Stopping in front of room 12, she knocked softly. No response. She knocked again, a little louder this time. "Housekeeping," she called. "I have some items for you." For a moment, silence stretched in the air. Then, the door cracked open just enough for the woman's face to appear. Her expression was a tense mix of irritation and exhaustion. "What?" she snapped. Lena blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness in her tone. Something about the woman's reaction, about the way she shielded the room behind her, sent a prickle of unease creeping down Lena's spine. Despite the woman's hostility, Lena kept her professional demeanor intact. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said, offering a polite smile. "I just realized I forgot to give you the TV remote and Wi-Fi information earlier." The woman's eyes narrowed, her expression tightening as she snatched the items from Lena's hand. "Next time, leave them outside. Don't disturb us again." Her voice was low, rough, almost a growl, and before Lena could respond, the door slammed shut in her face. For a moment, she stood frozen, stunned by the abrupt hostility. She had dealt with her fair share of rude guests over the years, but something about this interaction unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite explain. Shaking off the unease, she turned back toward her abandoned mop. But as she resumed cleaning, her mind kept replaying the encounter, the woman's agitation, the boy's exhaustion, their late-night arrival. It didn't sit right. Then again, in a place like the Starlight Motel, in a neighborhood like Orange Mound, unusual circumstances were more the rule than the exception. The clock on the wall now read 6:45 a.m., and the first hues of daylight were beginning to stretch across the sky. Lena forced herself to focus. There were rooms to clean, a long day ahead, but even as she moved through her routine, a small part of her remained alert, listening for any sounds from room 12. By the time she made her way around to the other side of the L-shaped building, her gaze drifted toward the small playground outside. The rusted swings and peeling slides stood as faded remnants of a time when the Starlight had been a stop for vacationing families, weekend travelers, before it became a haven for the desperate, the lost, the ones looking for a place to disappear. A faint breeze stirred the chains of the swings, making them creak softly, almost mournfully. "Maybe I should mention it to the boy when I see him next," Lena thought. Even in its dilapidated state, children had a way of finding joy in the simple act of swinging, of sliding. It might bring a smile to his tired little face. Then the quiet was shattered. A door opened suddenly, slamming against the frame. Lena turned, startled, just in time to see the woman and child from room 12 hurrying down the corridor toward the exit. The contrast from their arrival was stark. The woman looked even more haggard than before, her movements erratic, eyes darting around the motel as if expecting someone or something to come after her. But it was the boy that sent a chill down Lena's spine. His pajamas were gone. In their place, he wore nothing but a thin tank top and a diaper. His bare legs stuck out beneath the oversized shirt, his tiny feet completely exposed to the rough carpet. Lena barely had time to process the sight before she noticed the woman's grip tight, unyielding, practically dragging him forward. A knot of unease coiled in Lena's stomach. Something was wrong. She abandoned her mop and rushed to intercept him at the front desk, her heart pounding as she struggled to keep her voice steady. "Excuse me, is everything all right?" she asked, forcing a calm, professional tone. "Are you checking out already? If there's a problem with the room, I can process a refund." The woman barely spared Lena a glance. Her eyes were wild, unfocused, as if she hadn't fully registered the question. "We're not leaving," she muttered. Then, without another word, she shoved past Lena, her grip on the boy tightening. Lena watched, helpless, as the woman yanked open the car door and practically threw the child into the back seat before tossing the suitcase into the trunk. The boy didn't protest. He didn't fight. He just sat there, motionless. A sick feeling settled in Lena's gut as the sedan roared to life. The tires screeched against the cracked asphalt, the car lurching forward in a blur of headlights and taillights before it disappeared down the road. Lena stood frozen, a cold knot of dread curled in her chest. Something was very, very wrong. A deep unease settled in Lena's stomach, coiling tighter with every passing second. Something was wrong, not just odd, not just unusual, deeply and fundamentally wrong. The image of the boy in his inadequate clothing, the fear flickering in his sleepy eyes, the woman's erratic behavior, it all pointed to something sinister. Lena had always longed for a child of her own, but life in Orangemount hadn't exactly presented her with many suitable partners. Still, she had never lost that instinct, the protective pull that now surged through her like an unshakable force. She glanced at the clock. 7:20 a.m. The day shift receptionist would be arriving soon. There were still rooms to clean, tasks to complete, responsibilities she needed to focus on. With a heavy sigh, she tried to push her concerns aside and lose herself in her work. She moved from room to room, pulling open windows to let out the lingering staleness of overnight guests. But as she went through the motions, her mind churned with questions. Why had the boy been dressed like that? The woman had a suitcase, surely she had packed proper clothes for him. Had he wet himself? Was that why they had rushed out so suddenly? But if that were the case, why not simply ask for fresh linens? The more Lena thought about it, the more convinced she became that she needed to take a closer look. Her pulse quickened as she made her way back to room 12. Sliding the housekeeping key into the lock, she hesitated for just a fraction of a second before turning it. Her cleaning cart rolled ahead of her, a flimsy excuse for her intrusion. The door creaked open, and the moment she stepped inside, a peculiar odor hit her. Not the acrid stench of urine, as she had half expected, but something sharper, chemical. It clung to the air, mingling with the stale scent of cigarette smoke and cheap air freshener. Lena's unease deepened. Her eyes swept across the room. The bed was a wreck, sheets tangled, pillows tossed aside in haste. In the bathroom, water droplets speckled the floor. A damp towel crumpled in the corner. She moved to the bed, instinctively straightening the disheveled covers. And then she saw it. Tucked beneath the rumpled sheets were a handful of items that sent a wave of ice-cold dread surging through her veins. A bent spoon, blackened at the bottom, a small cluster of syringes, and 2 passports. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She had seen signs of drug use before, too many times to count, in a place like the Starlight Motel. But this was different. This wasn't just some junkie crashing for the night. There had been a child in this room. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut, a mix of sorrow and fury tightening her chest. What kind of mother would expose her child to something like this? She stood frozen, caught in the grip of indecision. Then, from outside the window, movement. Lena's breath caught as she saw the old sedan return, tires screeching as it pulled back into the lot. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't just the woman and child this time, a man had joined them. His face was hard, unreadable, a deep scowl settling into his features. His movements were sharp, restless, his eyes darting around the parking lot, scanning the area like someone expecting trouble. Lena's mind raced. Was this the boy's father? If so, why hadn't he been with him earlier? And if not, who was he? The questions multiplied, each more unsettling than the last. She watched as the trio made their way toward the motel entrance. The boy sandwiched between the adults, his small shoulders hunched, his steps uncertain as if trying to make himself invisible. Lena forced herself to move, to think. With trembling hands, she finished straightening the bed, careful not to disturb the damning evidence she had found beneath the sheets. She needed time to figure out what, if anything, she could do. As she wheeled her cart out of room 12, her gaze lingered on the boy. Something about the way he trailed behind them, small and silent, sent a wave of determination through her. In that moment, she made a silent vow. She would keep a close eye on room 12, no matter what it might cost her. Blank. The morning sun was climbing higher when Lena made her way back to the front desk. Her mind still racing. The clock read 8 a.m., and right on cue, the day shift receptionist, Barry McKay, came into view, pedaling in on his ancient bicycle. Barry, a lanky man in his mid-50s, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and a resigned weariness about him, had worked at the Starlight almost as long as Lena. He nodded in greeting, stowing his bike helmet in the small storage closet before logging into the computer. "Morning, Lena," he muttered, stifling a yawn. "Anything exciting happen on the night shift?" Lena hesitated. She wasn't sure how much to say, but the weight in her chest demanded she say something. Barry, she began cautiously, glancing toward the parking lot. Did you see that old sedan? The one with the woman and the little boy? Barry frowned. Yeah, saw, hard to miss. Kid was barely dressed. What's going on? Taking a deep breath, Lena quickly recounted the strange behavior. The late-night arrival, the mysterious man, and the child's fearful demeanor. Her voice was tight with concern as she finished. Barry, I'm worried. Something doesn't feel right about this. She lowered her voice. Do you think we should call the police? Maybe Child Protective Services? Barry let out a long sigh, rubbing a hand through his thinning hair. Lena, honey, this is Orange Mound. The words alone made Lena's stomach sink. You know how it is. Cops around here got bigger fish to fry. And CPS? He shook his head. They're so overworked. They barely bat an eye unless there's blood on the floor. Lena's shoulders sagged. She knew Barry was right. This neighborhood had seen worse. A child in a tank top and diaper, while concerning, was hardly enough to warrant an investigation in a place where far worse happened daily. Barry leaned against the counter, voice low. Besides, the kid's with his parents, right? Or at least his mum. CPS ain't gonna do much unless there's clear evidence of abuse. Lena nodded reluctantly, Barry's pragmatic words dousing the fire of her concern. She had lived in Orange Mound long enough to know that good intentions often led nowhere. But still, the image of the boy's fearful eyes lingered. Then, as if summoned by their conversation, the door to the motel office swung open. The woman from room 12 entered, followed closely by the man and the little boy. Lena and Barry exchanged a quick glance before plastering on their best customer service smiles. Good morning, Lena called out, her voice overly cheerful. I hope you found everything to your satisfaction. The woman barely grunted in response, her gaze fixed straight ahead as she marched toward their room. The man, however, paused. His cold eyes swept over Lena and Barry, a clear warning in his expression. But it was Noah, the little boy, who truly captured Lena's attention. Gone was the sleepy child from earlier. In his place was a small, withdrawn figure, his every movement tense, his eyes darting between the adults like a cornered animal. And then, for just a split second, Lena swore she saw a flicker of fear in his expression. The man's hand came down heavily on the boy's shoulder. Lena's stomach twisted. She turned to Barry, her earlier resolve wavering. Maybe you're right, she murmured. Maybe it's not our business. Maybe the night shift just got to me. Barry nodded sympathetically. Look, Lena, I know you mean well, but we can't save everyone who comes through those doors. Sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is mind our own business. Lena nodded slowly. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was just overreacting. But as she turned to continue her morning duties, the feeling that she should have done something clung to her. Then, a commotion from the hallway. Lena snapped her head around. There, just outside room 12, the little boy was struggling against his mother's grip. His small face twisted in fear and determination as he fought to break free. Lena's heart clenched. She took an involuntary step forward. But Barry's hand was suddenly on her shoulder, holding her back. They both watched, torn between the instinct to intervene and the ingrained habit of minding their own business. Then, the man turned. His gaze snapped toward them. Cold, hard, threatening. Lena felt her pulse hammer against her ribs. The man leaned in toward the woman, whispering something in her ear. The woman glanced over, anger and exhaustion flickering across her face. Lena and Barry approached cautiously. Is everything all right here? Barry asked, his voice carefully neutral. The woman whipped around. Don't you have anything better to do than watch other people's business? She snapped. The man, calm and composed, added smoothly, the kid's just being stubborn. We'll leave him outside for a while. He just needs some playtime after the long trip. Lena seized the opportunity. That's no problem, she said quickly. We have a small playground. I'd be happy to keep an eye on him. The woman hesitated, then turned to the boy. You can stay outside, but you listen to this lady. And be good. The boy nodded silently, his eyes wide and wary. Lena crouched down to his level, voice gentle. Would you like to see the playground? For a moment, Noah said nothing. Then, he shook his head slightly. Lena smiled. That's okay, we can just sit for a while if you'd like. A long pause. Then, finally, Noah nodded. The boy's response was immediate and heart-wrenching. No, he wailed, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. I want my real daddy. I want to go home. Panic flashed across the man's face. He cursed under his breath, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Lena barely had time to snatch her hand away before the car lurched backward, tires squealing against the asphalt. Her breath caught as she caught a glimpse of movement in the back seat. The rear door. It was opening, just slightly. The child was struggling with the handle. The car screeched to a halt, jerking violently before it could merge onto the road. Inside, The man was grappling with the boy, his movements frantic. Lena didn't think. She broke into a sprint. Her voice tore through the morning air. "Help! Somebody help! He's taking the boy!" Her desperate cries echoed across the nearly empty parking lot. From the corner of her eye, she saw Barry burst out of the motel office. Drawn by her screams, her lungs burned, her legs pushed harder, the rough asphalt biting at her worn shoes. Nothing else mattered. Not her job, not her safety, not the consequences. She had to reach that car. The boy's terrified face was visible through the window, his small hands still fumbling with the door latch. Lena's heart pounded as she reached out. Her fingers found the door handle. The metal was hot, warmed by the relentless morning sun. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, she yanked it open. For a single, breathless moment, she locked eyes with the child. Fear, desperation, hope. Without hesitation, Lena lunged forward, arms encircling the trembling boy. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured, voice shaking with emotion. "I've got you." He launched himself into her arms, his tiny body racked with sobs. Lena stumbled back, away from the car. A vicious curse erupted from the driver's seat. She looked up just in time to see the man's face, a mask of fury and frustration. For a terrifying second, she thought he might try to come after them. Then his eyes darted to Barry, who had finally caught up and was already dialing his phone. The man's expression twisted. With a final, snarled curse, he slammed the car into gear. Tires screeched. The sedan roared away, speeding off before anyone could stop him. But Lena's mind was already memorizing the license plate. Tennessee 783, XYZ. The string of letters and numbers burned into her memory. A vital piece of information. She tightened her arms around the boy, rocking him gently. "It's all right now," she whispered, stroking his damp hair. "You're safe." Noah clung to her, his small body shaking uncontrollably. Barry jogged up, his face flushed from the unexpected exertion. His usual easygoing demeanor was gone. "What the hell just happened?" he panted, eyes wide. Lena didn't hesitate. She told him everything. As the words spilled from her lips, Barry's expression grew darker. By the time she finished, he let out a low curse. "We need to call the police," Lena insisted. Her arms tightened protectively around Noah. That man was trying to kidnap this child. "And the mother," she added, voice sharp. "She might still be in danger." Barry hesitated. His natural skepticism warred with the blatant evidence in front of him. "Shouldn't we check on the mother first? Make sure this isn't some kind of misunderstanding?" Lena's jaw tightened. "Barry, every second counts. We should have made that call earlier. That man could be long gone if we wait." Barry took one look at her determined expression and sighed. He dialed. As he relayed the situation to the dispatcher, Lena turned her attention back to the child. She gently tilted his tear-streaked face to meet her gaze. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Noah hiccuped, his lower lip trembling. "No," he whispered. Lena smiled, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "That's a good sign." A pause. "Can you tell me who that man was?" Noah's face crumpled. Fresh tears welled in his eyes. He said, the boy sniffled, voice small. "He said he was my new daddy. But I don't want a new daddy. I want my real daddy." Lena's heart clenched. She pressed a gentle hand to his back. "It's okay, Noah, you did the right thing. We're going to find your real daddy. I promise." At that moment, the wail of sirens filled the air. Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Help was on the way. Barry ended his call, turning back to her. His expression was grim. "The cops are on their way. They want us to stay put with the kid until they arrive." Lena nodded. She shifted Noah to a more comfortable position on her hip. Then, her mind sharpened. "What about his mother?" she asked. "She might still be inside. What if she's tied up? Hurt?" Barry straightened. "I'll go check." And he was already moving, heading toward room 12. Lena stayed behind, gently humming to soothe Noah. The child's grip on her never loosened. Despite the warm morning sun, he was still shivering. "It's going to be okay," she murmured. "The police will be here soon. We'll sort everything out." Noah sniffled against her shoulder. Lena found herself wondering, what had led to this? What kind of mother would let her child be taken by a stranger? And where was his real father? A sharp noise made her look up. The front door to the motel banged open. Barry reappeared, urgency in his eyes. "Lena," his voice was taut. "Room 12 is locked. No one answered when I knocked. I think the mother's still inside." Lena's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a kidnapping attempt. This was something far worse. As the first police cruiser pulled into the lot, red and blue lights flashing, Lena braced herself. This was far from over. The quiet motel corridor was filled with tension. No response came from room 12. After several more attempts, the officer exchanged a grim look with his colleagues. In a swift, coordinated movement, they forced the door open. The wood splintered, the sharp crack echoing down the hallway. Lena held her breath as the officers rushed inside. Moments later, one emerged, urgently signaling the paramedics. "We need medical assistance in here," he called. As the paramedics rushed in with their equipment, Lena edged closer, Noah still clinging to her. She could see into the room now, and what she saw made her heart sink. Noah's mother, Krista, lay unconscious on the bed, her arm dangling limply over the side. Beside her, stark against the dingy bedspread, lay a bent spoon and several syringes, the same ones Lena had seen earlier. On the rickety table near the window, a stack of cash sat in plain view, far more money than the average Starlight Motel guest ever carried. An officer approached Lena, his face grave. "Ma'am," he said, "we suspect the man might have drugged the woman and attempted to kidnap the child. Do you know anything about this?" Lena shook her head, her voice trembling slightly. "No, officer, but when I cleaned the room earlier, the paraphernalia was already there. I don't think he drugged her. I think she did this to herself." The officer's eyebrows lifted slightly. He jotted something down in his notebook. Then, he crouched down to Noah's level, his voice softening. "Hey there, buddy, can you tell me if your mum sometimes acts funny? Like she's sleepy or confused when she shouldn't be?" Noah nodded slowly. His small fingers tightened their grip on Lena's shirt. "Sometimes mommy sleeps a lot," he whispered, "and sometimes she gets really angry for no reason. It's scary." A wave of sorrow washed over Lena. How long had this little boy been living in fear, watching his mother spiral deeper into addiction? As the paramedics worked to revive Krista, attaching an IV and monitoring her vitals, another officer turned to Lena, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Daniels. Can you tell me what happened here?" Lena took a deep breath. Steadying herself, she recounted everything from Noah and his mother's strange arrival to the attempted abduction. As she spoke, she felt Noah's grip tighten. His small body tensed as he relived the morning's horrors. Officer Daniels nodded. "And the license plate?" he prompted. Pen poised over his notepad. Lena didn't hesitate. Tennessee 783, XYZ. The letters and numbers burned into her memory. The officer relayed the information into his radio. "Dispatch, I need an APB out on a vehicle with license plate Tennessee 783, XYZ. Suspect is wanted in connection with an attempted kidnapping." As they waited for a response, Lena gently rubbed Noah's back, whispering soothing words. His sobs had quieted to occasional hiccups, but he still refused to let go of her. "Can you tell me your full name, son, and your mother's name?" Officer Daniels asked, crouching again. Noah lifted his head slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Noah Holloway. My mommy is Krista Holloway." The officer's eyebrows rose slightly. He repeated the name into his radio. "Dispatch, run a check on Noah Holloway, possible missing person case." The radio crackled. Then, "Officer Daniels, we have a hit. Noah Holloway, age 5, reported missing 2 days ago by his father, Michael Holloway. Address listed as 1247 Maple Street, less than 10 miles from your location." Lena's chest tightened. She turned to Noah, her voice gentle. "Did you hear that, sweetheart?" she murmured. "They're going to contact your daddy. He's been looking for you." For the first time that morning, hope flickered in Noah's eyes. "Really?" he whispered. "Daddy's coming?" Before Lena could respond, a commotion erupted from inside room 12. The paramedics emerged, carefully guiding a stretcher. On it lay Krista, her eyes dazed, her movements sluggish. An IV bag hung from a pole, clear liquid dripping steadily into her arm. "Mommy?" Noah's voice was small, uncertain. Krista's head lolled toward them. Her unfocused gaze struggled to land on anything. Then, her lips parted. Why are you still here?" Her words were slurred. Her expression shifted, confused, then distressed. "Where's Dale? I told you to go with him." A chill ran down Lena's spine. "Dale, the man's name." Officer Daniels stepped forward, his voice firm. "Ma'am, we need you to answer some questions about what happened here today." Krista's face twisted. "Questions?" she slurred. "I didn't do anything wrong." Daniels' voice was calm, measured. "We found a large sum of money in your room. Ma'am, we need you to explain what's going on." Her eyes flickered. Defiance crept into her drug-clouded expression. But she said nothing. She simply stared straight ahead. Her silence was a statement in itself. Then the screech of tires. A car pulled into the lot. A man leapt out. His eyes were wild, scanning the chaotic scene. Then, his gaze locked onto Noah. His face crumbled with emotion. "Noah, oh, thank God." Noah squirmed in Lena's arms. "Daddy." Lena set him down gently and he ran. Michael Holloway dropped to his knees, catching his son in a fierce embrace. Tears streamed down his face as he held Noah close, murmuring words too soft for Lena to hear. But the reunion was short-lived. A sharp cry rang out Krista. She had suddenly become more alert. Her wild eyes darted between Noah and Michael, anger and desperation twisting her features. "He's my son," she screamed, struggling against the restraints. "You can't take him from me. Noah, tell them you want to stay with Mommy." Noah buried his face in his father's chest. Then the police radio crackled to life. "Suspect apprehended. Vehicle with license plate Tennessee 783, XYZ intercepted on Highway 440. Suspect identified as Dale Mercer." A collective gasp rippled through the officers. Then, one officer returned, his face grim. "Mercer confessed. Says he was here to buy the boy. Claims the mother agreed to sell him for $2. A sickening silence settled over the group. Lena's knees went weak. Michael's expression darkened a storm of fury and disbelief. His voice shook with rage. "You tried to sell our son, for what? $2? Michael's voice was thick with emotion as he looked at Lena. "You're his guardian angel. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." Lena felt a lump rise in her throat, but she only nodded, giving Noah's back a gentle rub. The police were wrapping up their on-scene investigation when Officer Daniels approached once more. "We'll need you all to come down to the station," he said. "We need formal statements, and Child Protective Services will be there to assess the situation." Lena nodded. Then, suddenly, she remembered something. "Officer," she said, "Noah needs proper clothes. There should be some in the suitcase in the room. If you could find it." The officer agreed, dispatching another officer to retrieve the bag. As they waited, Lena's gaze drifted toward the forgotten sandwich she had left outside room 12. It hadn't been touched. Her chest tightened. Noah hadn't eaten. Turning to Barry, she asked him to bring some food and water for the boy, knowing that he must be starving. When Barry returned with a fresh grilled cheese sandwich and a bottle of juice, Noah wasted no time. He devoured the sandwich in eager bites, his small fingers gripping it tightly. Michael watched him, his expression a mix of relief and anger. "He hasn't eaten since last night," Michael explained quietly to Lena. Krista told him she didn't have any money for food. Lena nodded, her hands clenching at her sides. Neglect. Of all the horrors she had witnessed today, this simple truth infuriated her the most. A mother refusing to feed her own child. A 5-year-old going to bed hungry. She swallowed down her frustration, focusing on Noah instead. "Here, sweetheart," she said, handing him another piece of the sandwich. "You can eat this on the way to the station. It'll help keep you strong." The police returned with a fresh set of clothes. Lena helped Noah change in one of the motel restrooms. When they stepped out, he looked so much better clean, dressed in proper clothes, no longer trembling from hunger. For the first time, he almost looked like any other little boy. As they prepared to leave, Lena stood at a distance, watching as Noah and Michael climbed into a police car. The events of the morning had irrevocably changed everything. Not just for Noah and his family. For Lena, too. She had seen the darker side of life at the Starlight Motel before, but never like this. Never something this raw, never something this personal. As the police car pulled away, taking Noah and his father with it, a wave of sadness and disbelief washed over her. Years of living in Orange Mound had hardened her, but nothing could have prepared her for this. It felt like the darkest moment she had ever experienced. Yet, as she stood there, watching the dust settle in the empty parking lot, she was forced to face another truth, one far more personal. She had spent so long just surviving, just going through the motions of her life. But today had awakened something in her, a question that had lingered in the back of her mind for years. Could she ever have a child of her own? Did she even want to? And if she did, could she ever bring a child into this place, into this suffocating, hellish world? The day's events had shaken Lena to her core. They had forced her to confront the ugliest truths about human nature. But they had also lit a fire inside her, a fierce determination that she hadn't felt in a long time. She couldn't save the world. She couldn't stop the cycle of violence, neglect, and cruelty that seemed woven into places like the Starlight Motel. But she could do something. One small act of kindness at a time. As the chaos of the police investigation slowly faded, Lena turned back toward the motel, the weight of the day still pressing on her shoulders. But for the first time in years, she felt something else stirring within her. Purpose. She had made a difference today. And she was determined to keep doing so. Even in a place like this. Even when it felt like nothing could ever change. Because, in the end sometimes, one person stepping in at the right moment was all it took. And today that person had been her.